They were the epitome of innocence, joy, and the ideal family. But fame has a way of concealing its darkest secrets. While millions of fans cheered for the Partridge Family, one star was silently unraveling, not out of arrogance, but out of profound pain. It may surprise you to learn that Susan Dey turned down the Partridge Family reunion, and the reason has everything to do with a certain co-star. Can you guess who? And more importantly, why? America's sweetheart. In 1970, American television underwent a transformation when Susan Dey, a 17-year-old former model, was cast as Laurie Partridge in the Partridge Family. At the time, Dey was virtually unknown, with limited acting experience and a reputation as a model. Yet, her striking beauty and natural charisma propelled her to stardom overnight. She embodied Laurie Partridge with effortless charm, captivating audiences week after week. Her fresh-faced innocence and poised demeanor made her an instant favorite, earning her the title of America's sweetheart. Teenage girls adored her vibrant energy and pure, relatable charm, while parents loved her wholesome portrayal of Laurie, the perfect daughter in a musical family. The show, centered on a traveling musical family navigating the highs and lows of show business in a brightly colored bus, became a cultural phenomenon practically overnight. Merchandise adorned with the show's logo and Susan's image flew off the shelves, while its catchy tunes dominated the charts. The success was overwhelming. Each new episode attracted massive audiences, and Susan Dey became a household name almost instantly. Her face graced magazine covers, posters, and the hearts of millions. But what fans didn't see was the darker side of her rise to fame. While the world saw a doe-eyed starlet, the reality behind the scenes was far more complicated. The fame she gained so quickly wasn't the fairy tale it appeared to be. Beneath the adoration and glitter, a more fragile story was unfolding, one filled with the pressures of growing up under the unrelenting spotlight of fame. What audiences never saw. While the Partridge Family may have been full of laughter, family harmony, and idyllic adventures on their famous bus, off-screen life was anything but simple. The set became an arena where youthful dreams, personal conflicts, and unspoken tensions simmered beneath the surface. Fame, for all its glamour, was a heavy burden for teenagers thrust into the public eye, their every move under the microscope of fans and tabloids. Despite the gossip and rumors circulating through the media, David Cassidy, the Partridge Family's breakout star and Susan's co-star, later claimed that there were no major feuds among the cast. In fact, David Cassidy later insisted that the Partridge Family cast was more like a family than anything else. He fondly recalled his close relationships with his co-stars, especially Shirley Jones, who played his mother, Danny Bonaduce, his mischievous on-screen brother, and Susan Dey, his TV sister and confidant. However, no amount of affection could erase the undercurrent of complexity that comes with growing up in the glare of fame. Underneath the dazzling lights of the show's success, the cast members, particularly Susan, were dealing with the same turbulent emotions that any teenager experiences: hormones, secret crushes, and the sense of loneliness that often accompanies rapid fame. Susan herself later admitted that, despite their close bond, the overwhelming popularity of the show sometimes made it hard to maintain true, meaningful friendships with her co-stars. The weight of fame, combined with emerging personal differences, began to create subtle rifts that would only deepen with time. One of the most complicated dynamics on set was Susan's strained relationship with David Cassidy. On screen, they portrayed the perfect sibling duo, but behind the scenes, the tension between them was impossible to ignore. Both were rising stars in their own right, each with their own devoted fanbase. Yet, as Susan's fame skyrocketed, David's own growing stardom became a double-edged sword. The admiration from their fans became more intense by the day, but with it came the inevitable comparisons. They found themselves constantly balancing the expectations of their public personas against their private lives, a struggle that created more than a few uncomfortable moments between them. Susan's quiet, introspective nature contrasted with David's extroverted, larger-than-life presence. Their differences slowly began to emerge, and as Susan grew increasingly disillusioned by the relentless public expectations, the cracks in their seemingly perfect relationship widened. Behind the scenes, there were private moments of frustration, as well as silent tensions that simmered just beneath their on-screen chemistry. These conflicts were never made public, but over the years, as time wore on and the cast reflected on their experiences, those hidden tensions resurfaced. Despite everything, Susan's legacy as Laurie Partridge remained untouched. The show's success brought her fame, yes, but it also exacted a heavy toll. The real Susan Dey, the young woman struggling to balance fame, family, and self-identity, was often overshadowed by the role the world had come to expect from her. As the Partridge Family cemented its place in television history, Susan's complex feelings toward her co-star, David Cassidy, continued to evolve in ways she hadn't fully understood at the time. It wasn't just a simple crush, far from it. Susan's feelings were intricate, intense, and tangled with the unique pressures of growing up in the spotlight. While David basked in the attention of millions, effortlessly playing the role of teen heartthrob, Susan found herself drawn closer to him than she had ever expected. Between takes, they shared quiet moments, private jokes, and an emotional connection that went far beyond their roles on the screen. She had watched David transform from a teen idol into the star everyone adored, but it was David's own magnetic presence that kept her tethered, despite her best efforts to keep her emotions in check. Yet, David, already aware of his status as a teen sensation, often kept her at arm's length. The nature of their show, where innocence was key and any hint of romance was strictly discouraged, made it difficult for either of them to explore the deeper emotions that simmered just below the surface. Undress. Amid the whirlwind success of the show, its non-stop tours, and the unrelenting demand to uphold the image of the perfect family, Susan's private heartache remained hidden, tucked away beneath the layers of her growing fame. David, despite his playful and sometimes flirtatious behavior toward her, never crossed that line into anything romantic. As he later admitted, he found it easier to keep a safe distance, mindful of how their relationship might complicate the public image the show was trying so desperately to maintain. For Susan, the emotional distance became both a source of pain and confusion, one that she couldn't fully articulate, even as it weighed heavier on her heart. The rejection was never overt, but it existed in the silence that hung between them. As the years went on, Susan's feelings for David remained locked away, unspoken, unresolved, swallowed down amid the roar of fame and the crushing expectations placed on both of them. It was a quiet wound that, at the time, she didn't know how to heal. She poured her heartbreak into her performances, crafting a public persona that was as poised and composed as possible, while internally, she navigated the labyrinth of unrequited love. Her relationship with David Cassidy, though never fully realized, would come to define much of her early adult life, a bond full of longing, but never fully returned. As the years passed, and Susan sought to distance herself from the Partridge family and the pressure of being forever linked to Laurie Partridge, she buried the feelings she once had for David beneath the surface. But deep down, that secret heartache would never fully fade. The revelation that changed everything. As time moved on, and the Partridge Family became a cherished relic of nostalgic television, the actors who once embodied those iconic characters began to carve out new paths in life. For Susan Dey, this meant stepping away from the shadows of Laurie Partridge and pursuing a respected career in television and film. She became known for her roles in more serious, mature productions, far removed from the frothy, light-hearted sitcom that had made her a household name. For David Cassidy, however, the past remained an inescapable presence in his life, despite his best efforts to break free from it. His career continued to be overshadowed by the legacy of his teen idol status, even as he struggled with his own personal demons. In 2007, Cassidy decided to confront his past in his autobiography, Could It Be Forever? Within the pages, he revealed his experiences at the height of his fame, detailing his relationships with co-stars, fans, and the inner turmoil that often accompanied his heartthrob status. But nestled among the many revelations in the book, one confession stood out, a moment that would send shockwaves through his readers, and leave those who had lived the story in disbelief. Cassidy dropped a bombshell revelation that stunned both fans and those closest to him. During their years on the Partridge Family, he and Susan Dey had once spent the night together. The moment was described in vague terms, just a fleeting instance in time that seemed to haunt him as much as it had shaped their complex relationship. But for Susan, this revelation wasn't a mere footnote in a book. It was a betrayal, a deep breach of trust that would forever alter the course of their bond. Susan, who had spent decades separating herself from her Laurie Partridge persona and the emotional scars of her youth, was blindsided by Cassidy's words. Since the show's end, she had built a life for herself, one that didn't revolve around the world's image of who she was. She had moved past her time as Laurie, and the quiet ache of her unrequited feelings for David had faded with time. But now, that private, vulnerable moment from her past, a chapter of her life she had kept locked away, was thrust into the spotlight without her consent. Cassidy's confession wasn't a heartfelt apology or an attempt to heal the wounds between them. Instead, it was a salacious tidbit wrapped in tales of fame and fortune, a mere piece of nostalgia stripped of the real context and emotions that defined it. For Susan, this wasn't just a violation of privacy, it was a painful exposure of a deeply personal chapter she had hoped to keep hidden forever. Her silence in the years that followed spoke volumes. She chose not to respond publicly to Cassidy's words, nor did she attempt to correct the narrative that had now been set in stone. But her decision to stay absent from any reunion shows or interviews left little to the imagination. It was clear, she could never go back to the friendship she once had with David Cassidy. The wound that had been buried for so long had now been laid bare for the world to see, and it could never be healed. The line they had crossed was irrevocable, and Susan Dey's silence became the loudest statement she could make. She moved on, carving a new path for herself. After the Partridge Family wrapped in 1974, Susan found herself standing at a crossroads. While the world still saw her as Laurie Partridge, she was determined to be more than just a one-dimensional TV star. She longed to escape the trap of typecasting and find a new direction where she could be recognized for her talent, not just her past. It didn't take long for her to find that new path when she was cast as Grace Van Owen on LA Law, the groundbreaking legal drama that premiered in the mid-1980s. As Grace, a seasoned and accomplished attorney, Susan gave audiences a stark contrast to her naive, musical character Laurie. Her portrayal of Grace earned her critical acclaim, and she was honored with several prestigious awards, including a Golden Globe. This marked a pivotal moment in her career, a transformation from a nostalgic figure of a bygone era to a respected actress, celebrated for her depth and nuanced performances. As the 1990s rolled around and the Partridge Family nostalgia reached a fever pitch, with reunion specials and one-off episodes in the air, Susan's absence became more and more glaring. VH1 clamored for a reunion special, and ABC floated the idea of a comeback episode. Yet, Susan remained firmly out of the public eye, a symbol of an era she had long left behind. Fans of the Partridge Family Day. One by one, the original cast members expressed varying degrees of interest in participating, but Susan Dey remained silent. No interviews, no statements, no public reflections. In a world where most stars eagerly jump at the chance to cash in on nostalgia, Susan's refusal to engage stood out in stark contrast. Her silence was deafening, a dramatic departure from the excited voices of her former co-stars. For Susan, the Partridge Family wasn't just a sitcom, it was a time in her life that had shaped her, for better or worse. The silence that followed her decision became a powerful statement, her way of reclaiming control over a narrative that had, for far too long, been dictated by others. This wasn't just about avoiding a reunion for the sake of nostalgia, it was about preserving her dignity, her privacy, and her peace of mind. The real reason Susan Dey refused to participate in any Partridge Family reunion was far more complex and deeply rooted than most people realized. Insiders close to the production had long whispered about the true reason for her absence, and it had everything to do with one person, David Cassidy. While many speculated that her silence stemmed from disinterest or personal choice, those who knew Susan well understood that her decision was a direct result of the betrayal she felt at Cassidy's hands. This wound had festered over time, deepening with every passing year. It wasn't just a matter of old hurt feelings or faded memories from their youthful days on set. The betrayal went far beyond a romantic misunderstanding. This was personal. It was a violation of trust, a fracture in the fragile relationship they once shared. One former associate, speaking under the condition of anonymity, captured the raw sentiment with brutal honesty. "He's an evil piece of shit." The words rang with a mix of anger, disappointment, and unresolved pain that lingered long after the Partridge Family had aired its final episode. But it wasn't the pain of a failed romance that created this chasm. It wasn't the hurt of unrequited love or a childhood crush that had turned sour with age. No, the anger stemmed from something much deeper: trust, privacy, respect. In those pages, Cassidy casually mentioned the night they had spent together, a night that, in his eyes, seemed to hold no significant weight. But for Susan, it was a betrayal that exposed her to the world in a way she could never undo. That deeply personal moment, once shared in secrecy, was now public property, laid bare for the amusement and curiosity of fans. The vulnerability she had entrusted him with had been exploited, and David did not apologize for the pain he had caused. The betrayal wasn't the physical encounter itself, but the way it was trivialized and turned into fodder for his narrative. For Susan, participating in any reunion would have been an act of hypocrisy. It would have been a betrayal of her own integrity to stand beside the very man who had humiliated her in the most public way possible. To pretend that everything was fine, to act as though the broken trust hadn't shattered everything between them, would have been to dishonor the truth of what had transpired. And so, Susan Dey chose silence, she chose absence, she chose integrity over the false pretense of reunion. The road was harder, much harder, but in the end, she maintained her dignity. She had no desire to relive the past for anyone's sake, especially not for the sake of the man who had irreparably damaged their bond. When David Cassidy passed away on November 21, 2017, the world was plunged into a wave of nostalgia and grief. For millions, he was forever the charming teen idol from the Partridge Family, the heartthrob who had captured the hearts of teenagers and parents alike. Fans across the globe turned to social media to express their sorrow, flooding timelines with tributes, photos, and heartfelt messages. He was remembered not just for his fame, but for the joy he had brought into the homes of his admirers. But amidst the collective mourning, one notable silence stood out. Susan Dey, the actress who had once shared the screen with Cassidy, playing his sister Laurie Partridge, offered no public words of tribute, no tear-filled interview, no acknowledgement of the loss. Her silence was deafening. There was no grand gesture of mourning or reflection from her. It wasn't an oversight, nor was it the result of any unresolved animosity. It was a deliberate choice, a final act of self-preservation. Susan had long avoided revisiting the past, a past that, for all its glitter, had been marred by personal betrayals and private heartbreak. And so, she chose to grieve in her own way, in her own time, far removed from the cameras and the public gaze. While others rallied together to celebrate David's life, Susan Dey retreated into a quiet space, preserving the boundary she had fought so hard to maintain. The boundary that David Cassidy himself had once crossed, unknowingly or perhaps carelessly, in ways that still haunted her. As the years passed, the dream of a Partridge Family reunion lived on in the hearts of fans. There were speculations, rumors, and even official attempts to bring the beloved cast back together. Specials were made, documentaries were produced. Fans clamored for a reunion, for the shining moment where the Partridge Family would once again stand together, smiling in perfect harmony, just as they had in the 1970s. But as time marched on, that reunion remained elusive. Though the world saw glimpses of the Partridge Family cast through television specials and anniversary celebrations, the one reunion that everyone hoped for, the kind where all the surviving members stood shoulder to shoulder, basking in the collective love of their audience, never came to pass. Among the missing faces in these events was Susan Dey. She chose not to participate, standing resolutely apart from the nostalgic waves that had swept through her former co-stars. There were those who speculated about her absence, questioning why she had chosen to remain away when so many others had embraced the moment. But for Susan, the answer was clear. She had never been interested in living in the past, not when the past had so often been a place of pain. For Susan, the Partridge Family was a chapter she had long since closed. The show's legacy, its fandom, and the reunion projects only served as reminders of a time that had never fully healed for her, a time when her own personal suffering was glossed over for the sake of entertainment. Her decision to remain absent wasn't an attempt to distance herself from the love her fans had shown her. It was a quiet statement. Some things, some wounds, are not meant to be revisited. They are better left exactly where they ended, behind closed doors and tucked away in the quiet corners of the past. The message was a subtle one, but powerful. Not all reunions are meant to happen. Some stories are better left untold, some memories too painful to revisit. Susan Dey's refusal to return to the spotlight was not a denial of the past, but an affirmation of the importance of personal peace. She had built a life far from the echoes of her former fame. A life where she was in control of her own narrative. In a world obsessed with the past, with nostalgia, and with the idea of perfect reunions, Susan Dey taught us that some things are better left behind. That sometimes the greatest lesson we can learn is to leave the past where it belongs, in the past. Have you ever been betrayed by someone revealing one of your secrets? How would you have felt if this went public on such a huge scale? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching and see you next time.